Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome back. Let's start this evening with a story about the author of Tanya, Rabbi Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, and a party that he threw, a very strange party. It once happened that he sent instructions to his students, his disciples, the Hasidim, that they should have a big party, and he gave them some cash to go and buy vodka to make the party happen. And he explained the reason why he's asking this party to happen was because a big event happened in his personal life that day. What was the event? He said that he was taking in people who came to seek his blessing and advice, as he would do every day. Rabbi Zalman, the book of Tanya, is actually a collection of the advice that he gave people in his interactions, in his interviews. He eventually said, as he says in the introduction of Tanya, he doesn't have time to meet everybody and to give them direction, so he's putting it all in a book, and you can find the direction there. But in the meantime, during his lifetime, he did meet people on a daily basis, and during those meetings, he would be faced with all types of questions, spiritual guidance questions, personal issues. And the way he would help people was that he would listen to their problem. He would then meditate on the problem to find the same problem within himself, the same issue that he had himself. He had to relate to the person's problem. He had to make it his. And to make it his, he had to find it within. But not necessarily would everyone's problem be his problem. He hasn't had all the problems that everyone has. He would have to find it on some subtle level, on some symbolic level, on a deeper level. What they're going through, he has to find it within him. And then he would think of the solution he would have for himself. He would then translate that into how it would work for that person in their situation, and he would give them their advice. And he said that he was sitting having his meetings, and a person came in and told him that he is a terrible, horrible sinner about himself. He's saying that I am a horrible sinner, I've done terrible, terrible things, and he started listing all the ugly deeds that he had done. And he said, Rabbi, please give me some direction. How can I correct my soul? How can I repent? How can I fix myself after all the horrible things that I've done? And he listed some pretty shocking ones. So Rabbi Zalman said, I heard him and I listened, and I couldn't find what he did in myself. Not even on a subtle level. I couldn't even relate to the evil that he'd done at all. And it troubled me. How am I going to help this person if I can't relate to him? And I'm thinking, how can I find his sins within me on some symbolic level? And he said, I couldn't. And he said, so I locked myself away and thought about it very deeply. And eventually, I was able to come to him and speak to him because I was able to figure out 7 ways why he is better than me. 7 ways why I should look up to him, and he's a greater person than I am. And when I was able to do that, then I could help him. And so for this reason, I want there to be a celebration tonight. So here's the cash, go buy some vodka and celebrate the achievement that I achieved this evening. This story, we don't know the details of what the sins were. We don't know what the 7 things were that made this person greater than the Alter Rebbe. But the idea that a holy man, such as Rabbi Zalman, can look at a person who is a self-confessed sinner, who did stuff that the Alter Rebbe can't even connect on a subtle, intellectual, psychological level within himself. He's so low. And yet, Rabbi Zalman could look at him and say, but I look up to you. I can find 7 things that cause me to look up to you. This is the trait of humility. Humility is the ability to look at any person, no matter who and what, and without negating who they are, without making up a persona that they aren't, recognizing that I can look up to that person too. There is aspects to that person's life, to their personality, that I can actually respect and look up to. Maybe not everything. I don't have to respect everything they do, but every person has something that I can respect and look up to. That is what humility is. And in chapter 30 that we're going to explore this evening, Rabbi Zalman explores the power of humility and how it impacts happiness as well. It's a chapter dedicated to strategies on how to develop our humility. And it fits into the flow of Tanya in these chapters, talking about happiness and depression. Why? In what way does humility impact our happiness? Before we actually get into the discussion, let's figure out how it fits into our discussion. Why is Rabbi Shneur Zalman introducing a chapter about humility, teaching us the power of humility? How does that impact our happiness or otherwise? Is a humble person a happy person? Is a person who's not humble unhappy? Is there any correlation between humility and happiness? Any suggestions? Does humility impact happiness? Yes, no? In what way? Why would humility impact happiness?
Because you'd still be able to learn something from whatever your current experience was, which means that you'd still be able to understand that you'd be gaining something notwithstanding the situation, and that would indeed impact how happy you could be.
Mm-hmm. And so you need humility to learn from the situation?
Need, I think it's just something that we can't let it come.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So let's put the other way around. It might be there's not happiness, but you'll be less upset because you'll be in less situations that if you had a big ego or whatever, you'd get trampled on or whatever. You'd take up a lot of room, and so therefore those things would upset you. Whereas if you kind of minimise yourself, those situations would reduce. Therefore.
Correct.
Less upset, therefore more happiness.
Correct. An arrogant person fills up so much space, they're so self-absorbed that anything that anyone does insults them, upsets them, steps on their toes, whereas a humble person just it's not about me. So therefore they're less likely to get upset by all the things going on around them. Very good. Any other correlations between humility and happiness? Could a humble person be more upset, more sad? Or not necessarily? Yeah. Could humility bring sadness?
Maybe, but I think other people may be more grateful, and I think gratitude equals happiness.
Right.
So, yes, I think they're less
Yeah.
likely to be unhappy than people that have a lot.
Correct. When you're grateful, you're happy. When you feel entitled, so then there's never enough and you're miserable. Definitely true. I believe that the reason why Rabbi Shneur Zalman brings humility at this point in Tanya is because it connects directly to the topic of last week's chapter that we saw, chapter 39. Chapter 39, we looked at the Timtum Alev, the blockage of the heart. 29. The blockage of the heart, where the heart becomes blocked, disconnected, unfeeling. That we go into a state where we're not actually sad, we're just numb. The numbness of the heart. And we spoke about how we need to, when we go into those states, shatter, shake up, crush the heart, open it up to feel again. That only when the heart is broken is it feeling. The difference between an arrogant person and a humble person is that an arrogant person is complacent, is comfortable where they are, and feels self-contained and complete. They've got it all worked out, they're fine as they are, they don't need any help, they don't need to grow, they don't need to change, it's all fine. Whereas a humble person recognizes their need to grow. They're not satisfied with themselves, a humble person. They're not self-satisfied. And that lack of self-satisfaction is an itchy feeling to grow, to change, to develop, to become better. And that is a living heart. Rabbi Shneur Zalman has said all the way through these chapters about happiness and depression. Happiness is not something you need to get. Happiness is our natural state. If your heart is beating, if you're alive, you're happy. Unhappiness, sadness, is the lack of life, is where you're not alive. If you're not alive, so then you become deadened, and that deadened feeling, that closeness, that blockage is what we call depression. As long as you're living, as long as you're feeling, as long as you're reacting and interacting, you're alive, that is happiness. And that is where happiness lies. And so a humble person is going to have that, because a humble person is always ready to learn, is always willing to find out something new, is always willing to change themselves, question themselves, and take in the wisdom that is being offered to them to become a better person. Whereas an arrogant person, somebody who's the opposite of humility, they're so self-contained, their heart becomes numb because they're not open to change, to challenge, to growth. And so that leads to a lethargy, a laziness, and a depression. Arrogance, a direct correlation between arrogance and becoming depressed and heavy. Whereas humility is being alive, is saying, I don't know it all. I have what to learn. And like Rabbi Shneur Zalman said, I can learn from everybody. I can look up to anybody. There's something respectable that I can find in any person. That humility is simply being alive, being open to the world around you. And therefore it's essential to happiness. Let's see how he goes into this topic to bring out the power of humility. He starts by telling us that you must resolve in your heart to fulfill the instruction of our rabbis in the Talmud, that it says, be humble before every person. This you must be in true sincerity, in the presence of any individual, even in the presence of the lowliest of the low. Like the story that I told you illustrates that no matter what state that person is morally, you have to be able to be humble before that person. Humility, there's humility within me. There's also humility in my way that I relate to those around me. Humble before every person. The Talmud doesn't just say be humble. It says you have to be humble before every single person. Which means you have to be humble, not just act humble, but be it. Acting humble means that I can tell somebody, you've got so much to teach me. But really, I'm doing them a favor. I'm making them feel good. It's not really I can learn from them. I just want to lift them up. That's not humility. It's maybe kind to say that, maybe a nice thing to say, but that's not sincere humility. You're not being humble, you're just speaking humble. Being humble means you really, honestly, sincerely can look at a person, no matter how lowly they are, and be humble before them. Recognize that they have something to offer you. You're recognizing that they're lowly as well. There's no denying their reality. This person has done wrong, is doing wrong, is messed up, is doing whatever they're doing, and that's the truth. I'm not blind to that, but at the same time, I can see that there are areas where this person has something that I don't have. There are areas where I can look up to this person. And that has to be honest and sincere, and has to be in front of anyone, even the lowliest of the low. How do you actually reach that level where you can honestly look at anybody and look up to them, even recognizing their failings? How do you get there? So Rabbi Shneur Zalman helps us out. And he's assuming in this chapter, if you've already got up to chapter 30 in Tanya, so that means that you're a bit of a spiritual seeker, you've been working on yourself somewhat, and you've got somewhere. And the risk is, when you are a spiritual seeker, that you can become a little bit arrogant. You can start to be a bit condescending towards those who you feel are not up to your par, who haven't reached your level. That it's specifically a malady of those who are into spirituality, that a certain smugness can sneak in, where we start to feel that, we've got truth, we've got this path, and there are all these people who are not on the path, who are not there, or at least not as far as we are. We found the light and they're still in the darkness. And that could lead to a certain arrogance and condescending look at the world around us. And so it's particularly if we're studying chapter 30 of Tanya, we have to hear, how can we look at somebody who is nowhere near studying Tanya, nowhere near any spiritual path, nowhere near that at all. In fact, they're quite lowly in their spirituality. They're quite dysfunctional and doing the wrong thing. How can we learn from them rather than preach to them? That's who Rabbi Shneur Zalman is talking to. And so he says, this idea is based on the instruction of our sages in the Talmud. Judge not your fellow until you are in his place. For it is his place that causes him to sin. Because his livelihood requires him to go to the market for the whole day and to be one of those who sit at the street corners where his eyes behold all types of temptations. The eye sees and the heart desires, and his evil nature is kindled like a baker's red-hot oven. He's giving a metaphor here. He's talking in the 1700s to his crowd and using metaphors and examples that we could probably apply in our own way today. And he's saying that if you look at somebody who's lowly in their spirituality, who's not just unrefined, they do the wrong thing. They're sinful, they're evil, they're immoral. They're living a life that's improper, it's inappropriate. Says the Talmud, don't judge that person until you're in their place. Why? Because their place, their circumstances are possibly the cause of why they're doing what they're doing, and you're not in that place, so you don't know what it means. So the example he gives is, maybe that person is out in the marketplace all day, seeing all the sights and exposed to all types of things where they're tempted to do the wrong thing. The big world out there is not a shining moral world. There's all types of possibilities to do wrong out there. There's all types of temptations of inappropriate relationships, inappropriate business deals, inappropriate activities. It's all out there flashing its lights at us. And so somebody who spends their entire time out there in that world is prone to fall. You may be a person who doesn't have that particular challenge because that's not where you spend your time. You spend your time in more safe environments. And you look at somebody else who has to go out there into the world, into the dark world out there, sitting on the street corners where they see all types of stuff, and then the eye see, the heart desires. What we're surrounded with becomes what we want. That's the whole basis of advertising. You see it, you want it. If you see it enough times, you're going to want it. And so somebody who's exposed to stuff that's inappropriate constantly, not because they're looking for it, but just because they're out there in the world, is going to actually want that after a while and start chasing after it. And so what happens is, from seeing it, the heart desires, and then their evil nature, their animalistic side, their evil inclination, is kindled like a baker's red-hot oven. It's a phrase, it's a biblical phrase, the baker's red-hot oven. And back then, again, in biblical times, the hottest thing you could think of is an oven, but a baker's oven is much hotter. Because your oven at home, you put on to make your dinner, and then that's it. But the baker's oven is on all the time. It's constantly baking one loaf after the other. So the baker's oven is really hot. And that's how hot the evil inclination can get, that passionate drive for evil, from being exposed to evil. And so when you see somebody who's gone down the wrong path, hang on a minute, their place, their situation, their surroundings may have caused them that, and you haven't experienced that. So if you haven't been in their shoes, if you haven't experienced their thing, so then you cannot judge them and look down upon them for the evil that they're doing, because who knows where you'd be if you'd be in their shoes. Who knows what you'd be doing if you had their experiences. Now, of course, you can have many people who are out there in the world, see all types of temptations and don't fall for it. Not everyone who sees chases after everything that they see. But Rabbi Zalman continues, it's different, however, for someone who goes but little to the marketplace and who remains in his house for the greater part of the day. Or even if he spends the whole day in the market, but is possibly not so passionate by nature. For the evil inclination of all people is not the same. There is one whose nature is heated and others whose nature is cool. Meaning, you can have two people who are in the same external situation, but internally they're different. Every person has their own personality. Some people are easily driven by the sights that they see. They have a heated personality, it's called in mystical writings, meaning they're easily passionate and excited into things. And so therefore, it's harder for them to control themselves. Whereas another person may be quite dispassionate and cool in nature. A cool person, cool not in the sense of cool in the sense of cold, they're not tempted by things. They're just not interested. They're just not very alive in that sense. And so the fact that they're not sinning, they're not doing the wrong thing, that they're withstanding temptation, is they're not tempted in the first place because it's just not their thing. It's just not their temptation. They have different challenges. The person who's very heated and passionate, their challenge will be to direct their loving nature correctly, to not fall into the wrong loving situation, and to direct it properly. A person who's got a cold nature, that's not their challenge. They're not so loving in the first place. Their challenge is to become loving in the appropriate place, to develop their loving kindness. They're more disciplined naturally because they're just a cold type. So a cold person may be more disciplined, but that's not because they've disciplined themselves, that's because their nature is that way. Their challenge is not discipline, their challenge is to be a bit more loving, to warm up a little bit. Whereas another person who's overheated, they need to discipline themselves. They need to hold themselves back. They need to learn to cool off sometimes and to direct their warmth, their heat in the correct way. So if one person who feels they've reached a very high level of spirituality, looks at another person who seems to be on a lowly state. So before jumping to conclusions and looking down at that person, just wonder, if I'd be in their circumstance, would I have made it any better than them? If I'd have their challenges, their personality, their surroundings, their urges, would I conquer them myself? Do you have any clue the answer to that question? Can you possibly answer what you would be like in somebody else's shoes? You can't. So therefore, any person you see who may have fallen into a terrible situation, before judging them, say, I don't know how I would be in their situation because I've never been there. I've never been them. Now this, Rabbi Shneur Zalman is not exonerating anybody from culpability and from responsibility. Every person is responsible for their moral actions, no matter what their makeup is, no matter what their surroundings are and their situation are. We all have free choice, and we're all able to overcome whatever urges are inside us, whatever temptations are around us, and to do the right thing. Anyone can do that. And if we've done wrong, we have to be responsible for it, and we have to make amends. We have to work on it, and not trying to find excuses that my upbringing made me that way, or the way my parents treated me when I was little, or the job I'm in, or the world we're in, or what everyone's doing. They're not excuses. We have to be responsible for our actions. That's talking about being responsible for yourself. But when it comes to judging another person, our job is not to judge them as being wrong. We can recognize the wrong that they've done. We're not denying that. But to say that I'm any better than them, I can only say that if I've been in their circumstances. And I haven't. I never have. I can never be in their circumstances. So to look down at a person should actually be impossible, based on this way of thinking. Any questions so far? So this must have been the meditation that Rabbi Shneur Zalman went through when he met this person who he couldn't imagine their sins. He couldn't imagine how they could go so low. He couldn't even find it with himself on a subtle level, the depravity that they'd reached. But then he said, well, hang on. I was given the soul of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the author of the Tanya. This person was not given that soul. I get to sit here in my office and give people spiritual advice all day. This person has to go out into the world and face the challenges of the world out there. So who am I to look at him and say that he's lowly and I'm higher than him? I can find many areas where he's higher than me. If I'd be in his circumstance, I would be much worse. The fact that he hasn't done worse than he's done, I should respect that. I should find some dignity in that, to be able to look up at every person. So this, what's interesting I think about this is, Rabbi Shneur Zalman and the Talmudic sources he's quoting here, they don't expect us to be not judgmental. It's not really humanly possible to be non-judgmental completely. And in fact, it may not be such a good thing to not be judgmental. I know that's heresy today. These days, one of the 10 commandments of the secular world is thou shalt not be judgmental. However, from a Jewish perspective, that's actually not so realistic. In fact, some of those not judgmental people are so judgmental of the people who are judgmental that they're also judgmental. It's not really possible. What is possible is to judge favorably. To judge favorably is different to not be judgmental. To judge favorably means, I'm judging you. I see what you're doing is wrong. I need to be able to recognize wrongdoing. I need to be able to recognize evil. Otherwise, I'm not a moral being. If I'm non-judgmental, saying, look, each to their own, who says that's wrong? That's their truth, that's their goodness, and there's no truth. If I'm saying that, then I'm not a moral being. I've lost my moral compass. I need to be able to recognize wrongdoing and evil for what it is in other people, so I can recognize it in myself. If I don't recognize what's right and wrong, I'm really going to just excuse my own wrongdoing by saying, well, each to their own. That's the real underlying philosophy behind the non-judgmentalism. It's to not judge myself, and then I'm not a good person. I need to be able to judge right and wrong. However, when it comes to another person's life, I have no idea what they've gone through. I have no idea their circumstances. I don't know what their experiences are. So for me to judge them as being evil and wrong, I can judge their actions, But to say that they are worse than me, I can't, because I don't know what I'd be in their circumstance. So it's not don't judge, it's judge favorably. And that will lead to a real humility. That any person, I can see their actions, but I can look up to them. I can respect them because I don't think I'm any better than them. My circumstances may be easier. I may have been given greater gifts than them. But who knows if I'd be in those circumstances where I'd be. That is humility. He says further, it is indeed a great and fierce struggle to break one's passion, which burns like a fiery flame through fear of God. It is like actual martyrdom. That paragraph I need to explain. To break your passion, meaning to not do something that you have an urge to do, when you are faced with that temptation, is a fierce struggle. Because the passion is burning like this fiery flame, and to hold it back, to stop it, to prevent it, to not allow it to spread, is extremely hard. What do we need to counter it with? With fear of God. The idea that a fear of God doesn't mean to be scared of God, like what God's going to punish me. Fear of God means that how can I go against God's will? How can I do that which God has said not to do? How can I jeopardize my relationship with God by doing the wrong thing? That's what fear of God means. So I've got on the one hand my inner passion to do something that is immoral, and I've got the fear of God on the other side trying to prevent me, hold me back, stop me from falling into that act. Sounds very nice, but that's not an easy battle. To actually hold yourself back from doing the wrong thing is excruciatingly difficult. It's a fierce struggle. It's like actual martyrdom, he says. Martyrdom is one of those words that has sadly been misappropriated these days. Martyrdom, what he's talking about here, means where your life is threatened for being Jewish and you die. You die because you're a Jew. You give your life up for being Jewish. That's what a martyr is. We have to redefine the word back to its original correct meaning. A martyr means being killed passively, not actively, not looking for death, certainly not killing another person. Being killed for being Jewish. That's what a martyr was. Rabbi Zalman says a very dramatic thing here. Denying yourself your passions is like actual martyrdom on a miniature scale. It's like killing a part of your own energy in a very positive way. You're burning it up in the fire of goodness. But it's so excruciating to deny what you want, what your body wants, because you know it's wrong, is an excruciating thing. And so to make light of somebody who didn't make it, who wasn't able to withstand it, who failed their test, it's not so surprising that there are people who miss out. We don't always get it right. We don't always withstand these tests. So to look down at a person, we shouldn't. It's excruciating to beat ourselves. When we do, when we stand up to those temptations and conquer them, it's a huge victory. Therefore, each person, according to his place and rank in the service of God, must weigh and examine his position as to whether he is serving God in a manner commensurate with the dimensions of such a fierce battle and test. Meaning, you've got to measure yourself and say, well, how many martyrdoms have I had today? How many times have I withstood those tests to that extent? How many times have I faced such a challenge where it's so excruciatingly difficult to go against my desire, and I've won, and I've beaten it, and I've conquered it, and I've done the right thing? Am I doing that all day? Is that what I'm busy with? And if not, how can I then look at somebody who wasn't able to withstand their test so well? How can I do that? What he's saying here is a very subtle but powerful idea. And that is that in heaven, from the divine perspective, every person is judged not according to how much good or evil they have done, but they're judged according to how far they have gone in their struggle with good over evil. Meaning, there's not like some people have the image. There's not a tally in heaven of our good deeds and our bad deeds, and they're added up. You did 27 mitzvahs today, but you did 58 sins today. So today's a bad day. You've outweighed the sins over the good deeds. You better do better tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. It's not so simplistic like that. The judgment that we're judged in heaven is based on how far we have moved. How many victories have we had over evil? How much goodness have we introduced compared to where we were? Taking into account our circumstances, keeping in mind who we are, how much goodness have we generated? How far have we gone? And for that, each person is individually judged. You cannot compare one person to another. I'm often asked the question, do you really believe that religious people are better people than non-religious people? I have very often met religious people who are not very moral, and non-religious people who are paragons of goodness and do such good in the world. So why should religion be seen as a force for good if there are people who are not religious at all, don't believe in God, don't go to synagogue, couldn't give a stuff about anything ritualistic, religious at all, and they do so much good? And then you have people who go to synagogue every single day, and they dress the part, and they do everything that looks religious, and they're rotten, dishonest, unkind, immoral people. What type of force is religion if that's the case? Good question. I better answer it, right? Otherwise, what are we doing? What am I doing here? The answer is, you cannot compare one person to another person. The question is, that person who's religious and rotten, would that person be a better person if they weren't religious? Is the religiosity making them into a bad person? Or is it, thank God, that at least they do some good deeds? Maybe they have certain areas where they're not good, but at least they have some areas where they have good deeds. That person who's not religious, is their non-religiosity what makes them good? Or is it that they're good in spite of the fact of not being religious? Is that the cause? Or is that just a fact? You can't compare them. What you should compare is, if that religious person would drop religion entirely, would he be a better person? If he stopped going to synagogue, would he be better now? Is going to synagogue what's making him so rotten? Is that where he's getting it from? Or would he be worse? That person who does good, let's say they did start going to synagogue, let's say they started studying Tanya. Would that make them worse? Would they lose their goodness now? Would they be corrupted by it? Or would they be even better? Each person is on their own plane, on their own journey, and you can't compare one person to another. Therefore, if you bring to me a religious man who is dishonest in their business and mean to other people, and a non-religious person who's extremely kind, generous, and giving, and ask me, so who's better? It's a meaningless question. Comparing two people, that means nothing. If you show me the same person 5 years ago, and how they are today, and how they are in 5 years, then you can ask the question, who's better? Is this person better than they were 5 years ago? Will they be better than they are today in 5 years' time? That you can compare. The same person you can compare. But to compare two people who's better makes no sense. We all need to improve in our interpersonal morality and in our spirituality in our relationship with God. Because one person is good with that and weak with that one can't be compared to the other person who's good with the other and weak with that one. Each person is on their own journey. The question is religion a force for good in their life, or is the religion the cause of the evil in their life? And in some cases, you might find religion being the cause of evil. It can be. There are religions who are the cause of evil. Then that has to be dealt with. But each person is judged according to their circumstance. Therefore, all I know is my circumstances. I don't know yours. I don't know anybody else's. I don't know where they are, but I know where I am, and I know what's expected of me. And therefore, for me to look down at another person because where I perceive them to be on this hierarchy, what clue do I have where they are? How do I know what inner struggles they've had? Somebody who has failed in their tests, and we've all failed. We've all had tests that we failed. Moral tests that we didn't do the right thing. Okay, but to do the right thing is an excruciating thing. How many times did I get it right? How many times am I actually conquering my inner demons and doing the right thing? Or am I just coasting along comfortably and not really challenging myself? So maybe I'm not getting up to the mischief that other people are getting up to, but that's because they're being tested and failing. But I'm also being tested and failing every day because I'm not conquering my personal challenge, my demons. Do I feel like I'm experiencing actual martyrdom on a daily basis? If not, then I'm not actually serving God. And so I have to work on myself before I start worrying about other people's lack of morals. The idea Rabbi Shnei Zalman is introducing here is that every person is judged according to their scale. There is more expected from certain people, and from certain people less is expected of them. Meaning, for some people, their challenges are very simple, straightforward, and lowly, to just do the right thing and not get up to terrible mischief. For other people, that's not your challenge. Your challenge is a much more refined challenge. It's a higher challenge. And if you're not living up to your standard, then you're as bad as the person not living up to their standard who's doing much worse than you. To illustrate this, I want to illustrate this point clearly, to get the idea of different levels of expectation. Should these people be judged to a higher standard? Policemen, should they be judged to a higher standard? Should more be expected of a policeman than of the average person? If a police does something wrong, illegal, inappropriate, should they get the exact same treatment as any other person? Or should they be held to a higher standard? Yeah, they should be held to a higher standard. Why? Because they should know better. If you're choosing that line of work, so then you're representing the law, so you've got to keep it. A policeman that breaks the law, that's worse than another person breaking the law. They're human beings like everybody else, but still they're representing something, and so therefore them breaking it, more is expected of them. What about this guy? A judge. If you're a judge, so you're meting out justice. So when a judge does something immoral, it's worse. When they do something illegal, it's worse because they're going against the very law that they represent. Or a barrister as well, a lawyer, maybe not a judge, but a lawyer, a barrister, somebody who represents the law. It's expected that they're going to live to a higher standard. When they do wrong, it's more serious because they're more aware. If you know what you're doing wrong, then that's much worse than somebody who doesn't know any better. Somebody who doesn't realize. So then there's certain things that everyone knows is wrong, but there's certain subtleties that not everyone knows. Each person is being challenged on their level. What you're aware of, you've got to be doing the right thing. If you didn't know any better, so then ignorance is sometimes an argument. But it's not an argument for somebody who should know better. Ignorance doesn't work. Let me illustrate this with a real life story. The case of Eugene McGee. True story. Happened in South Australia. What happened? It happened on a Sunday in November 2003. After a lunch with his mother and brother, with a bill showing 3 bottles of wine and a stubby of beer were purchased at this lunch, Eugene McGee drove back home. But on his way, he had a fatal crash where he killed a cyclist. Ian Humphrey was the name of the cyclist. A car in front of him and another passerby stopped to see what happened to this cyclist, but McGee drove away. So, all we know so far is an accident happened involving this McGee. He killed a cyclist and drove away. We know that on the bill from the lunch that he just had, that he was driving home from, were 3 bottles of wine and a stubby of beer, and he was having lunch with his mother and brother. They're the facts that we know at the moment. I want you to be the jury in this case. So listen carefully. Now, fleeing the scene is against the law. Right? We know he's killed this guy accidentally, but he's killed this guy on the road. He's fleed the scene is against the law. But drink driving is an even more serious charge, as is death by dangerous driving, which comes with a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment. So, fleeing the scene, you maybe will get a fine for, and maybe a suspension of your driver's license. But drink driving and dangerous driving that causes a death, that's already up to 10 years in prison. So what does this guy deserve? Anyone?
More than 10 years, because he's a judge, he should have known better.
Well, we don't know who he is, what he is. Sorry?
He might not have consumed any alcohol.
We don't know if he consumed any alcohol. We know the bill said 3 bottles of wine and a beer. Maybe the brother or the mother drank the whole thing, and he didn't have anything.
So he was definitely driving the car.
But he was definitely driving the car.
The cyclist could have been drunk. The cyclist could have been drunk.
Yeah, we don't know. We don't know how the cyclist was riding.
Did he have his mother in the car?
No, he was alone.
But he still fled the scene.
Yes, he fled the scene. We know that.
Maybe he was unaware that he hit the cyclist.
Which points to him possibly
Could be,
being drunk.
could be. So the witnesses who were there, who saw it happen, they saw it was him. There's no doubt that it was him. They said that there's no way he could have not known what had happened. It's clear that he would have known that. But we don't have proof that he was drunk. He claims that the 3 bottles of wine and the beer, so first of all he says the beer he didn't touch, there were only 2 bottles of wine, we were charged for 3, but we actually only had 2. And so amongst the 2 of us, I had a couple of sips, I wasn't drunk. That's his claim. We don't know. What can we say? We don't know. All we know, we know that he caused the death. We know that he fled the scene. That's all we know so far. Let's get some more facts. A short time afterwards, he pulled onto a side road. This is just after the accident. He pulled onto a side road and rang a close friend, lawyer David Edwardson. During the next few hours, he was to ring Edwardson another 3 times, and also other members of his family. And then 2.5 hours after the accident, his battered car was found at his mother's house. So immediately after the accident, he'd called his friend a lawyer.
So it's showing that it's reflected, like that there's something has
Has
happened,
acknowledged.
and there's significant enough for him to have called this lawyer, additional to other members of his family.
Right. So
We don't know why
he
he called.
we don't know why he's called the lawyer 4 times.
He just said it could be making arrangements.
Yeah. Maybe he's meeting his lawyer friend later on for another meal. We don't know why he's called his lawyer, but that's who he called. He pulled over on the side road, called the lawyer 4 times, called his family member, and then 2.5 hours later, his car was back at his mother's house. So, have we got any more guilt yet? Do we know what's going on here?
It would appear that he's panicked and done something, sought legal help, and then panicked and gone round to his mum's, because that's what you do when you're upset. Maybe you could see him on the
Yeah.
What do I do? Help me.
Yeah. Well, we know that he's killed a guy on the road and he's left the scene. So he needs legal advice. I mean, yeah, so far, no more than that. But let's go on. So the court was told that after leaving the car at his mother's, McGee was driven by his brother back past the accident scene, where 6.5 hours after the accident, he gave himself up to the police. So he came to the accident scene and said, I was the driver. 6.5 hours later. He could not be breath tested by police at this time, as it was outside the 2 hours allowed by legislation that only 2 hours from an accident can you do a breathalyzer to determine whether the person at the time of the accident was inebriated, was intoxicated, was drunk. So they couldn't do, he came, but they couldn't do a breathalyzer on him. So what do we think?
You presume he was even guiltier because you'd wonder why someone would wait 6 hours, because you'd think if he was under the influence, 6 hours would be enough time for the alcohol to leave your system, and then he felt safe enough to go. That's what you'd assume.
It's a bit sus. It's a bit sus that he's showing up 6.5 hours later. Although, was he to know that you can't do a breathalyzer then and there's no trace and... Why was he driven by his brother?
Was he in shock, maybe?
Maybe. Maybe he's freaked out.
His car was broken.
You could explain it that way.
Or his car was broken.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't been in this circumstance. I mean, what's it like? Who knows? Who knows what you go through? Don't know.
If his brother drove, means he wasn't drunk.
The brother wasn't drunk.
Mother.
But this is the brother you're talking about?
Yeah, but
Well, this is 6.5 hours later.
This is his other brother.
So in explaining his behavior, McGee says he was in total shock and froze, and his memory of what happened after the accident is almost blank. So why did he drive away? Why did he pull over? Why did he call the lawyer? Why did he call his mother? Why did he drive the car to the mother's house? Why did it take him 6.5 hours to come back? He says, I was in shock. I actually don't remember. It's all blank. Guilty?
I get a psychologist into saying that you can actually lose your memory for that long. Because if it's possible, then it could have happened, right? If it's logically possible.
Could have. I'm sure people lose their memory for a lot longer than that after trauma.
Yeah.
Use hypnotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know what kind of person he is. He could have been a good person who made a mistake, and that shock is so severe that he would behave that way and not know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know how you're going to experience that.
Correct. So he's presenting a story. The story stands up, like to some extent, like it fits. It makes sense that he's saying, I wasn't drunk. Okay, we don't have proof that you're drunk. He's admitting that he caused the accident. He's admitting that he drove away, and that he called the lawyer, and it took him 6 hours to come back. But he's saying, because I was in a daze, I was in shock, and I don't remember what happened.
He's still at the scene.
Yeah, he's admitting that.
Yeah.
So he's guilty of the accident. He's guilty of, and fleeing the scene. He's guilty of. Is he guilty of drink driving? Of causing a death while driving recklessly? Does he need to go to jail, or not?
The only thing you could say is that calling the lawyer before he called anyone else seems to be a very rational act.
Yeah, doesn't
And when you compare that to then not remembering anything, it's kind of,
Yeah,
it's a bit of a stretch then.
yeah. Calling the lawyer. It's a friend of his that called 4 times.
Unless it's how friends are.
Why him? Why'd you call him? Yeah, it's a bit sus. Anyway, so does the fact that he only turned himself in when it was already too late to breathalyze him, and he called a lawyer straight after the accident, indicate that he was familiar with the law and was craftily seeking to avoid a harsh sentence? Could we say that he's presenting this story, I don't know what was going on. Hang on a minute. It's very convenient that you spoke to a lawyer, and after speaking to a lawyer, you showed up at the scene, but only 6.5 hours later, when it was too late to be breathalyzed. So we can't prove that you were drink driving. Is that indicating that he knew exactly what he's doing, he knew the law and was manipulating it?
Maybe
don't
his lawyer
know.
did.
Maybe.
His lawyer did. That's maybe the advice that he was
Yeah.
given.
But his car was smashed up outside his mum's house, so you never know, like if he couldn't get a lift to the scene or something, maybe he had to wait for his friend to come pick up. I don't know.
Maybe. We don't know. It's a tough one. If we'd be the jury, we can only go by the facts that we have. You know, we can't just start guessing. So what did they say? Ultimately, McGee was found guilty in court of driving without due care and failing to stop and give assistance after an accident. So that's nothing about the alcohol or causing death as a result of that. It was driving without due care and failing to stop. He ended up with a $3,100 fine, and his license was cancelled for 1 year. And that was it. That was his sentence. Now, after the verdict, there was a radio interview going on outside the courthouse where the ABC Radio asked its court reporter one quick question: were there any unusual aspects of the trial? The court reporter said, well, one of the things that the jury were never told about throughout the trial was that Eugene McGee himself is a prominent drink-driving lawyer, and that the first person he rang was lawyer David Edwardson, who is also a well-known death by dangerous driving defense lawyer. But the jury wasn't told that during the case. Somehow, that was kept under wraps. Does that change things? I mean, he is a drink-driving lawyer, the guy himself, the driver. So he knows what the rules are. For him to drive off after having that accident, he knows exactly what he's doing there. Okay, he's in shock. Maybe he's in shock.
2 hours. Sure.
But he knew what he was doing, and he knew who to call. His friend, who happens to be a defense lawyer for death by drink driving. That's what his friend's expertise was. Does that make him more culpable? Well, the fact that the jury didn't know this, who knows, would have made a difference. Interestingly, he still practices as a lawyer, as his crime was not deemed enough to have him dismissed. So he continues as a lawyer. Now, all the facts here, they're just straight out of the media. I don't think I can be sued for sharing these facts. It's just straight out of the news stories that came out when this happened. But do we know what the truth is? We have no idea. But one thing for sure, knowing that somebody themselves is a lawyer, and they know the laws intricately, and they've conferred with a friend who's in that particular area of law, they know exactly what they're doing, so such a person has to be more responsible for their actions than somebody who has no clue. I mean, there are people who don't know the law. We're supposed to know the laws. Drink driving, we're supposed to know you can't do that. Driving away from the scene of an accident, you're supposed to know you can't do that. To know that there's a 2-hour window of when to be breathalyzed, I don't know how many of us knew that exact number. When you know when you manipulate the law, that's much worse. I don't know whether he's guilty of that or not. I have no idea. But certainly, when we feel that somebody has the knowledge, then they're more responsible than somebody who didn't have the knowledge. And this is exactly Rabbi Shneur Zalman's point in this chapter of Tanya. The more knowledgeable a person is, the more spiritually in tune the person is, the better you know of what you're supposed to be doing, the more responsible you are. The less somebody's aware, then their challenges are less. They don't know where they're supposed to be, and so therefore they can't be judged on the same plane. So it's specifically somebody who feels they have advanced spiritually should actually be much harsher on judging themselves than judging anybody else. Because if you are on that level, then where are you? What challenges are you facing? Are you up there? Are you fighting the battles? Or are you coasting along? and somebody else who's not on your level spiritually, who's the lowest of the low, okay, but their circumstances are very different. And so therefore their challenges are different. The fact that they're failing their challenges, well, what about your challenges? Are you passing yours? Are you fulfilling yours? You should be expecting much more of yourself. Don't judge yourself on the lowest common denominator plane and say, well, I'm better than this lowliest of the low. You need to be doing where you are, your own challenges, you're overcoming your own challenges. Rabbi Shneur Zalman gives some examples. For example, in the service of prayer with kavanah, with devotion, pouring out your soul before God with your entire strength to the point of exhaustion of the soul, while waging war against your body and animal soul within it, which impede your devotion. A strenuous war to beat and grind them like dust each day before the morning and evening prayers. Ever tried that? If here he's saying, you look at somebody who's lowly, who's failing morally. But hang on a minute, what about you? Have you ever prayed like this? Have you ever prayed with such devotion that you exhaust your soul, that you grind up your evil side? We've spoken in the previous chapters about the war that's going on during our prayer between the divine soul and the animal soul. Have you ever really got into that war and grinded up, completely obliterated your animal soul in prayer to the point where you're exhausted afterwards? This is supposed to happen every morning and every evening when we pray. Have you done that? Are you doing that? Is that where you are? Because let's say you're not having these lowly challenges. This is your challenge. Your challenge is to be able to pray with passion to the point where you're sweating and exhausted at the end of it. If you haven't done that, so then you haven't faced your challenges yet. You're not on any spiritual level to be looking down at anybody else. Or anyone who has not reached this standard of waging such strenuous war against his body has not yet measured up to the quality and dimension of the war waged by one's evil nature, which burns like a fiery flame, that it be humbled and broken by dread of God. If you've never experienced that, so then where are you? What he's trying to do here is he's trying to throw down a spiritual challenge to those who are already a bit more advanced. Maybe we're not dealing with the daily ugly lowliness of the world. Maybe we're a little bit higher than that. But this is the challenge. The challenge is to really feel the inner battle against your animal soul that's trying to stop you from praying, to the point where you are a fiery flame of passion for goodness, overcoming the passion for evil. If you haven't felt that inner challenge, that inner battle, so then don't look down at anybody else. You've got your own challenge that you've got to face. So too with other commandments, especially in matters involving money, such as the service of charity, tzedakah, and the like. He calls it the service. A service avodah means the work of charity. Charity doesn't just mean giving charity. It means, what about when it's difficult to give? Do you still give? What about when you're not so inspired to give? Do you still give? What about when you're not sure if this cause is a worthy cause? Where's that coming from? Is that coming from a real search for truth, or is it coming from your own natural stinginess to not share your wealth? When it comes to matters of money, in Jewish tradition, charity is actually called tzedakah, which doesn't mean charity, it means justice. Justice, which means that there's a certain portion of your money that doesn't belong to you. It was given to you to pass on to a good cause. And therefore it's only right for you to give it. So the service, the avodah, the spiritual work of charity means not just writing out a check, but it means that you actually see the receiver as doing you a favor because they're alleviating you of money that doesn't belong to you. You have an obligation to pass it on. And by passing it on, you're doing a mitzvah. They're giving you that opportunity. That's the avodah of charity, as opposed to looking at our money with this very possessive look as that this is mine, and for me to give any of it is such an amazing achievement for me to do. No, it isn't. It's tzedakah. It's justice. It's just fair. It's just right. This is the work of charity. So when it's not so easy to give, are you still willing to give? That is one of the challenges that we have to face of battling our inner evil. Even in avoiding evil, every sensible person can discover within himself that he does not turn aside from evil completely and in every respect, where a hard battle at a level such as described above is called for, or even on a lesser level than the aforementioned. For example, let's give an example of just a mundane battle with evil. To stop in the middle of a pleasant gossip, or in the middle of a tale discrediting his fellow, even though it be a very small slur, and even though it be true, and even when the purpose of it is to exonerate oneself. As is known from what Rabbi Shimon said to his father, I did not write it, Rabbi Yehuda, but Yehuda the tailor wrote it, when his father replied, keep away from slander. This is a story in the Talmud. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman is bringing it as an example of the type of things we say on a daily basis, which we don't even think are wrong, but are. The story was that there was a certain document that was written incorrectly, and Rabbi Shimon was blamed for it. His father said, "Well, look at this document you wrote; it's no good." And he said, "I didn't write it. Rabbi Yehuda the tailor wrote this document." So his father says, "Keep away from slander. Don't blame somebody else. It was true. Somebody else had written it. But did you have to name who it was? You could have said that, no, I didn't do that. But did you have to say who did it? Did you have to point out who did the wrong thing? Even though what he said was true, and it was just to exonerate himself, that wasn't me, you're saying I did it, it was actually somebody else. Fine, but why do you have to say who it is? It's such an innocent thing. Is this the worst thing you could possibly say? We have to control our speech, that we don't say things negative about another person, even when they're true, because it's not necessary. Why did that need to be told? It's fascinating. The laws of Lashon Hara, of evil speak, are a copious area of Jewish law. And in summary, what it is that to speak negatively about another person is forbidden, even when it's true. The only exception to it is where there's necessary information that I know for a fact I need to share, which is not much of the time. Most of the things we say about other people are not necessary information, even if it's totally true. We don't need to talk about it. And by talking about it, we're just speaking negatively about other people. It makes us feel good by putting other people down. It's a horrible habit. The Talmud says that's one of the sins that we do every day. That's one of the things that we fall for every single day, because it's so easy to just let out a little negative word. Now, of course, there are circumstances where you do need to speak about another person. If somebody's asking you, I'm thinking of hiring this person, can you tell me about them? If you know that person is a dishonest person, so then your obligation is to tell that potential employer, this person is not honest, if you know that for a fact. But to tell anyone else that when it's not relevant to them, there's just no need. There are times when you need to speak, but most of the time we don't. To hold yourself back when you have a bit of juicy gossip and to not say it, or when you've started saying it, to interrupt and stop. When you've got a line to say, an insult, a put down, and it's going to be a really good one, but to not say it is so excruciatingly hard. But that's what's expected of us. That's our battle. These subtle battles that we have to graduate to. We're not talking here about telling lies. We're telling the truth, but it's negative. We don't have to say it. To control yourself is excruciating. But this is our mission, and if we're not doing that, so then we can't look down at another person who's failing in their missions, in their challenges, because that's their challenge, and this is your challenge. If you're not passing your challenges, how can you look down at another person who's not passing theirs? Each one is in their circumstance. If you know better, you're judged on a higher stage, on a higher level. I just want to share with you on this topic of speaking and controlling your speech, a fascinating letter that was written by the Frierdiker Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. He was a great-great-grandchild of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. He lived in the last century, passed away in 1950. So this was a letter that was written to him. Somebody wrote with the following question: what can I do to stop my habit of poking fun at people? I can't control it. The words just come out of my mouth. Even though I always deeply regret it afterwards, my resolutions to stop making fun of people only last a few days, and I'm back to my old tricks. What can I do to stop doing this? This is a guy who obviously has a sharp tongue, good sense of humor, and is able to say these great one-liners that put people down. And as innocent as that sometimes is, we're just joking, but we all know when we've been on the receiving end of one of these sharp lines in front of a crowd, it could be embarrassing, degrading, and destroying to our personality and our sense of self, even when it's just a joke. And so this guy recognizes, I know I'm doing the wrong thing, I know I shouldn't be poking fun at people, I know I shouldn't be saying this, but I can't help it. It just comes out. And I've tried to stop, and I've made these resolutions, because I regret it every time. I can see that I embarrass people, but my resolutions only last a couple of days. How can I get myself out of this? Any suggestions? It's a hard one.
Just be more conscious. Position.
Be more conscious.
Be more aware. Be more present.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like an unconscious habit, something that is so ingrained in the way you do it. I would look at what is the value or what he gets out of it. Maybe try consciously to replace it with something different.
Yeah.
Because he gets something out of that.
Right.
Maybe the glory, the laughter of the crowd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he needs the attention, or somehow by putting others down a little bit, it lifts him up.
Yeah.
So he needs to explore what it is, become more aware. And what's he doing wrong? He's saying he's making resolutions. So he's saying, I'm not going to do that ever again. I'm never going to make such a comment. And then the opportunity rises and it falls out of his mouth. It just pops out of his mouth. So he's got to go more within. He's got to go deeper within and try and lift it up from inside of him, like explore where it's coming from. So this is what the Frierdiker Rebbe told him. And I think it's a very simple, on the surface, quite a simple suggestion, but a very profound one. He says, the Rebbe says, you will only be able to save your own soul by discipline and commitment. You need to place a muzzle and bridle over your mouth and not say a single word until you have considered whether it is worthy of saying or it's better to stay silent. You must do this every single day. As soon as you wake up in the morning, affix the muzzle on your mouth and do not forget about it for one moment until you go to sleep.
That's like creating another habit. It's replacing, because the habit created by repetition. So if you do it again and again and again, it becomes like a second nature. So you're actually replacing it with stopping and thinking and contemplating if you want to share that idea with the people.
Right. So it's retraining yourself. I think at first, when I first read this, I thought, 1 second. He already said, I'm making resolutions and it's not working. So now the Rebbe is telling him, so make a resolution. That didn't work. How is it different to what he was doing originally? What's he suggesting that's new here?
The introduction, save your soul.
Yeah.
It makes him think twice.
Yeah. But what was he doing before? What was his resolution? What was he trying that was not working? He was saying, I'm not going to insult people. That's what he said. He said, I'm not going to insult people. Everything else is fine. My normal conversation is fine. The problem is my insulting people. These sharp lines that I'm saying to people is hurting people's feelings, is embarrassing. I've got to stop that. So he's letting himself free to talk other than that, but when there's a chance to insult, I'm not going to do it. Well, by that time it's too late. By the time the opportunity is there, you've been letting yourself free to talk, so what's going to stop you then? What's going to hold you back at that moment? So the Rebbe says, you have to be disciplined, not just then, not just when there's opportunity to insult someone, but all the time. Your speech has to be disciplined. So you need a muzzle. He's not saying literally to tie something on your mouth, but you have to imagine, you have to visualize that there is something tied over your mouth the entire day. As soon as you wake up, you say Modani, thanking God for waking up, and then you tie something on your mouth, figuratively. And any time you need to say anything, not just insults, anything, think, is this worth untying the muzzle for? Is it appropriate for me to now actually go and let my mouth open? Is what I'm about to say worthy of being said or not? If not, I'm leaving the muzzle on. And that way, you've taken steps way before the opportunity to insult somebody comes. You're controlling every word that comes out of your mouth. And when you do that, from the moment you wake up in the morning till the moment you go to bed, you've got this muzzle on your mouth. When you're speaking that way, so then you're not going to come anywhere near falling for those insults. Because even the normal talk that you say will be controlled. I think what here the Frierdiker Rebbe and what the Alter Rebbe in our chapter here has been offering us is a much higher expectation of ourselves. It's not enough that we don't tell lies, that even speaking negatively is not right. But how can we not just let these words fall out of our mouth? There's a level of avoda, of working on yourself, where you actually work on thinking before every word that comes out of your mouth. But everything that you utter, is this supposed to be said or not? And of course, for a while, that's going to be quite awkward. You can imagine this guy doing this and following this. For a while, he's going to be not very conversational. He's going to be unsure of what he can and what he can't say. He's not going to be much fun to be around for a while. But it's going to create a new habit in his talking, where it's considered thought-out speech, and that'll become his nature. That'll become natural to him. So these are the type of tests that we have to be going through. So when we look at somebody else who is actually a liar, an outright liar, they're using their mouth for evil, and we say, well, I'm not that. Okay, but that's not your test. That's not your challenge. But what about this? Do you sometimes say something that gets a laugh but hurts somebody's feelings? Can you control that? Well, if you can't control that, so why do you expect that person to control their lying habit? You've got your habits, they've got their habits. And if you're the lawyer who knows the law and they don't know so much, if you're a bit more advanced and more knowledgeable of what's right and wrong and they're less, so then more is expected of you than of them. So how can you be arrogant and look down at them? Maybe you should be looking up at them, because you might be failing more than they are in your particular challenges. This humility, this sense of I can look up at people, not look down at people. I know my inner challenges, I don't know theirs. This is an open and broken heart. This is a heart that's feeling, that's able to learn. And if you're able to learn, if you're able to respect, if you're able to look up, if you're able to listen and not be closed, arrogant, self-contained, and self-sufficient, so then your heart is feeling. And if your heart is feeling, then that is happiness, that is joy. It's the closed, arrogant heart that is in a state of misery because it's not feeling anything. But humility brings to joy. So in conclusion, complacency is the enemy to joy. Humility means looking up to every single person. You don't know someone else's struggles, but you know your own. So therefore you can look up at them and not feel arrogant and condescending towards them. If you aren't battling, then you aren't in the game. Don't look at somebody else's failures. Think about, where are my battles? Am I struggling every day? Am I fighting with these things? Am I trying to speak on a high level? Is my soul on fire with passion? Am I in the battle? If not, so then don't look down at somebody else's failings in their battles. We've got to be alive. And it's complacency that leads to a blocked up heart. Humility will open it up to feel again. If we have humility, then our heart is feeling. And a feeling heart is a joyous heart. Okay. We'll conclude there. If there are any questions, welcome to stay and ask questions. We'll continue next week, God willing. And also I wanted to just mention that the festival of Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, is coming up less than 2 weeks' time. Saturday night, the 23rd of May, we're going to be having an all-night learning program here in the shul, starting at 9 p.m. on Saturday night, going till 5 a.m. And I wanted to announce also our feature of the evening will be a panel discussion, and the topic is, do drug dealers deserve the death penalty? And that topic is going to be addressed by a social worker who works with juvenile criminals, by a pawnbroker, by a drug dealer, convicted drug dealer who has done his time, and a rabbi. And the rabbi was the hardest to find. So that will be here on the evening. That's going to be towards the beginning of our all-night learning program, and with many other stuff going till the morning. So that's next Saturday week. So 23rd of May. You're welcome to join us here. Hope to see you then. Thank you.